Beneath the vast Egyptian sky, where the golden sands stretched endlessly, a child was born under an unsettling celestial alignment. The moon hung low, stained red like fresh spilled blood, while a rare, serpent-shaped constellation shimmered ominously above. The village of Per-Bastet whispered in hushed tones, watching as the cries of a newborn girl echoed through the temple walls. "She was born beneath the serpent's eye," murmured an elder, his voice trembling. "A child of misfortune, cursed before her first breath." Her mother, Neferet, cradled her close, shielding her from the fearful gazes of the gathered priests and villagers. She named her Neferet, meaning beautiful and pure, hoping to defy the darkness looming over her daughter's fate. But even as Neferet whispered her name with love, the wind carried an unsettling hissus sound only the gods could understand. Days later, the village gathered at the temple of Wadjet, where the high priest would bless the child and inscribe her name into the book of fate. The temple, carved from ancient stone, bore the markings of Wadjet, the great serpent goddess, protector of the Pharaohs. A massive golden cobra stood coiled behind the altar, its emerald eyes gleaming under the torchlight. As the high priest raised his staff to offer the blessing, the sacred flame at the altar flickered violently. Then, before the crowd's horrified eyes, the fire twisted into a deep emerald green, a sign of divine anger. Gasps erupted as the high priest staggered backward, his aged face drained of color. "The gods, they have spoken," he whispered. "This child walks a dangerous path." Neferet, swaddled in fine linen, gurgled softly, unaware of the fate woven into her existence. The villagers, however, stepped back in fear. No child born under such omens could escape destiny. That night, while the village slept, Neferet crept to the temple steps, her heart heavy with sorrow. She knelt before the towering statue of Wadjet, her hands trembling as she placed an offering of lotus flowers and honey. "Great Wadjet, protector of Pharaohs, mother of serpents," she prayed, her voice breaking. "If my child is cursed, I beg you, let it be undone. She is innocent, untouched by sin. Spare her from whatever fate the stars have written." The temple was silent. Only the flickering of torches and the distant cries of desert jackals answered her desperate plea. Then, in the dim glow of the temple, a sudden shadow slithered across the floor, silent, smooth, watching. The sacred cobra of Wadjet, a divine symbol of power, coiled near the altar and lifted its hood. Its golden eyes bore into Neferet's soul, unblinking, unreadable. A whisper soft as sand shifting in the wind echoed in the air, though no voice spoke. "Fate cannot be undone." Neferet's breath caught in her throat. She knew, in that moment, that no prayer could change what was to come. She clutched Neferet tighter, pressing a desperate kiss to her forehead. Whatever lay ahead, she would protect her daughter for as long as she could. Years passed, and Neferet grew into a striking young woman, her beauty unmatched in the village of Per-Bastet. Her eyes, an unusual shade of golden amber, shimmered like sunlight on the Nile. Yet, it was not her beauty that made people whisper, it was her strange affinity for serpents. Since childhood, snakes had never feared her. When others recoiled in terror at the sight of a cobra slithering through the reeds, Neferet remained calm, watching, understanding. She spoke in whispers no one else could hear, and the creatures responded, curling around her wrists like living bracelets. "She has the mark of Wadjet," the villagers murmured. "The goddess watches her." But for what purpose? Neferet never understood why the serpents came to her, only that she felt connected to them, drawn to their silent wisdom, their graceful power. But her mother, Neferet, forbade her from speaking of it. "You must never let them see," she warned. fear darkening her gaze. The gods do not give gifts without a price. One fateful evening, Neferet was summoned to the temple. The oracle of Wadjet, an ancient priestess whose blind eyes could see the threads of fate, had requested her presence. The temple chamber was dark, heavy with the scent of incense. The oracle sat on a raised platform, her frail body draped in linen, golden rings adorning her fingers. When Neferet approached, the oracle reached out, her fingers brushing against the young woman's forehead. A sudden shudder ran through the old woman's body. She gasped, her breath rattling like a dying wind. "The serpent, the curse, the golden staff," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Beware the inner sanctum of Wadjet, child. Should you set foot within it, the gods will seal your fate forever." Neferet's heart pounded. The inner sanctum, the most sacred chamber of the temple, was a place no mortal could enter. It was where the golden staff of Wadjet, the symbol of the goddess's power, was kept. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What will happen?" The oracle turned her lifeless eyes to Neferet, her expression haunted. "The serpent does not choose its skin," she murmured, "but the gods have chosen yours." Despite the prophecy's warning, Neferet tried to live as any other maiden of her age. She spent her days gathering lotus flowers by the river, weaving linen, and listening to the laughter of the village girls. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, as she walked through the palace gardens, she caught the gaze of Prince Kamose, heir to the throne of Kemet. He was tall, with sun-kissed skin and eyes as deep as the Nile. The moment their eyes met, something shifted in the air, a pull neither could deny. Kamose pursued her, sending her golden bangles, lotus-scented oils, and silken garments finer than any she had ever touched. Neferet, though hesitant, found herself drawn to him. But love between a prince and a commoner was forbidden. When the high priest of the temple learned of their meetings, he stormed into the palace. "This girl is touched by the serpent goddess," he thundered. "She is unworthy of the throne." Kamose defied him. "The gods do not decide whom I love," he declared. But the priest's words unsettled Neferet. Was she truly cursed? Could she ever be worthy of love? A dangerous thought took root in her mind that would change her fate forever. Neferet could not shake the oracle's words. She needed to prove herself to the gods, to Kamose, and to the world. And so, one moonless night, she crept into the temple of Wadjet, her heart hammering. The great serpent statues loomed in the shadows, their jeweled eyes gleaming in the torchlight. Neferet moved quickly, her feet silent against the stone floor. She knew the inner sanctum was forbidden, but she had to see it with her own eyes. She pushed open the great bronze doors. Inside, at the heart of the chamber, stood the golden staff of Wadjet, a magnificent relic, shaped like a coiled cobra, its eyes embedded with emeralds that seemed to glow. Neferet stepped forward, mesmerized. "One touch," she thought. "One touch, to prove I am chosen. To prove I belong." Her fingers brushed against the cold gold. A sudden hiss filled the air. The torches flickered violently. The very walls of the temple shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Then, from the shadows, a presence awakened. The air grew thick, heavy with divine power. A green flame erupted at the base of the staff, spiraling upward like a living serpent. A voice deep, ancient, filled with wrath echoed through the chamber. "Foolish mortal, you have broken the sacred law." Neferet froze, terror coursing through her veins. The goddess Wadjet had awakened, and the price of her defiance would be greater than she could ever imagine. The air inside the temple of Wadjet turned thick and suffocating, as if the very gods had exhaled their fury upon the earth. Neferet staggered backward, her hand still tingling from where it had touched the golden staff of Wadjet. The green flames that had erupted from the staff now coiled into a single towering inferno, twisting and churning, forming the shape of a colossal serpent. Then, from within the fire, two enormous emerald eyes opened. "You have broken the sacred law," the voice hissed again, echoing from every direction at once. Neferet fell to her knees, paralyzed. She tried to speak, to plead for forgiveness, but her voice refused to come. The serpent's form slithered toward her, the flames shifting into a divine presence, Wadjet herself. The goddess's massive hood flared, the weight of her power pressing down on the chamber. "You were warned, child," Wadjet's voice rumbled. "You were given signs, and yet you have defiled my sanctum, touched what no mortal may touch. For this crime, there is only one punishment." A sudden force lifted Neferet from the ground, her body frozen mid-air, as if unseen hands had taken hold of her. Then, the pain began. A searing burn spread from her fingertips, racing up her arms, her shoulders, and down to her legs. Her bones cracked, twisting unnaturally. Her breath hitched as she felt her spine stretch and contort. Then came the most terrifying part of her skin. It hardened, shifting into something smooth, dry, and cold. "Scales!" Neferet screamed. But the sound that came from her lips was no longer human. It was a hiss. Her limbs retracted, disappearing into her body as she writhed on the temple floor. The world blurred, her vision changing, no longer human, no longer belonging to the realm of mortals. Her once beautiful black hair melted away, leaving behind only glistening green-gold scales. She slithered in terror, struggling against the curse. But the magic of Wadjet was absolute. Above her, the goddess watched in cold judgment. "You will crawl upon your belly for eternity," Wadjet decreed. A warning to those who dare defy the gods. With one final flash of green fire, the chamber fell into darkness. When Neferet opened her newly formed serpent eyes, the temple doors slammed open, and she was cast out into the world, no longer a woman, but a creature feared by all. By dawn, the rumors had spread. The villagers gathered in horror as the enormous serpent coiled in the temple courtyard, its golden eyes filled with something that should not exist in a beast-themed sorrow. Mothers clutched their children. Men brandished weapons. Even the priests who had once blessed Neferet as a newborn now stood in silent terror. "A demon!" someone cried. "She is cursed," another shouted. Neferet tried to speak, but the only sound that came was a low, trembling hiss. She could feel her mind slipping, the instincts of a serpent warring against the remnants of her humanity. Then, through the crowd, he appeared. Prince Kamose. His face was ashen, his dark eyes wide with shock. He took a step forward, staring at the serpent that had once been the woman he loved. "Neferet," he whispered. At the sound of his voice, something stirred deep within her. She slithered forward, desperate to reach him, to make him understand. But before she could get close, the high priest raised his staff. "Stay back, my prince," he commanded. "The gods have condemned her. She must be cast into exile." Kamose whirled around, fury darkening his face. "She is not a monster," he bellowed. "She is still." "She is no longer human," the priest interrupted. "She belongs to the desert now." Before Kamose could react, the villagers surged forward, their torches burning bright against the dawn. Neferet felt her instincts take over. The fear, the hatred, the weapon-sure serpent body coiled defensively, her hood flaring just as Wadjet's had in the temple. She was dangerous to them now. And so, before they could strike her down, she fled. Her long, scaled body slithered into the wilderness, disappearing beyond the reach of those who once called her one of their own. The desert stretched before her, an endless expanse of golden dunes and searing heat. Neferet had once walked these sands as a woman, but now she crawled upon her belly, feeling the warmth of the sun seep into her scales. She was alone. Days passed, then weeks, then months. She slithered through the vast empty lands, hiding in the shadows of temples long abandoned, coiling in the cool shade of ancient ruins. She was not forgotten. The whispers of her legend spread beyond the kingdom, carried by merchants and travelers. Some spoke of a cursed maiden, doomed to live as a snake until time itself forgot her name. Others feared she had become a guardian of lost tombs, waiting to strike down those who dared disturb the resting places of kings. But none knew the truth. None knew the sorrow that still lingered in her golden eyes. None knew that, even in the body of a serpent, she still dreamed of being human once more. Time had no meaning in exile. Days blurred into nights, and seasons passed like shifting sands. Neferet, once a maiden of beauty and grace, now slithered through the vastness of Kemet's deserts, a creature of legend and fear. Yet, her mind remained untouched by time. Deep within her scaled form, the heart of a woman still beat. She longed for her voice, her hands, her place among her people. But mortals feared her. Travelers recoiled in terror when her shadow crossed their path. The kingdom she once called home whispered her name like a curse. Still, she refused to surrender to her fate. Somewhere in the world, she believed, there had to be a way to undo the curse of Wadjet. And so, the search began. From the shifting sands of the western desert to the towering cliffs of Abu Simbel, Neferet journeyed in secret, listening to the winds that carried the words of the wise. Priests, wanderers, and forgotten gods each left behind fragments of knowledge, hidden in temples long abandoned. One name, above all, surfaced in whispers: Isis, the goddess of magic and resurrection. If any deity could break a divine curse, it was her. But reaching Isis's realm would not be easy. Only those deemed worthy could step before her. And to prove herself, Neferet would have to face the trial of the three temples. Her first challenge lay in the ruins of Hermopolis, where the scribes of Thoth, the god of wisdom, once recorded the secrets of the gods. Before her stood a crumbling stone altar, and upon it, a single scroll. The voice of Thoth echoed in the chamber. "Answer my riddles, serpent, and prove that wisdom still dwells within you." The riddle was ancient, woven with the essence of divine truth. What is both the beginning and the end, yet neither? Neferet stilled. She had once heard this question in childhood, whispered by temple priests. The answer was simple, yet profound. Time. A pause. Then the stone altar shifted, revealing a hidden passage. She had passed the first test. Beyond the temple of Thoth, she slithered into the hall of Anubis, where the jackal-headed god weighed the hearts of the dead. Here, she was faced with her greatest tormentor past. A vision appeared before her, clear as polished obsidian. She saw Prince Kamose standing before the temple gates, searching for her. She saw his anguish, his grief, his endless longing for the woman he had lost. "Do you wish to return?" the voice of Anubis asked. Neferet's heart twisted. More than anything, she longed to stand before Kamose once more, to feel his touch, to hear him speak her name as a woman, not a monster. But then, the vision shifted and she saw another path. A serpent coiled around a golden throne. A protector, not a prisoner. The gods do not erase fate, Anubis warned. They only give choice. Return to the man you love, or accept your new form and wield the power of a guardian. But you cannot have both. Neferet hesitated, and then, for the first time, she chose herself. I will endure. Anubis's eyes gleamed. The path forward opened once more. The final trial led her to the Temple of Ma'at, where truth and balance ruled above all. Here, she was met with a single command: trust a mortal to see your soul, not your form. The meaning of the test was unclear until the temple doors creaked open, and through them stepped a man she thought she would never see again. Kamose. The years had changed him. No longer a prince, but a king. Kamose stood tall in robes of white and gold, his eyes weary from ruling a kingdom alone. When he saw the massive serpent coiled in the temple's light, his breath caught, but not in fear. He stepped forward, his movements careful, measured. Neferet, he whispered. She recoiled, the weight of her curse pressing upon her. She could not speak, could not tell him how she had searched, how she had fought against fate. And yet, he knew. He reached out, hesitating only for a moment before pressing his palm against her scaled head. You have never been a monster to me, he said softly, and you never will be. A shudder ran through Neferet's form. For the first time since her exile, she felt something change within her. Could it be? Was this the key to breaking the curse? Had she found someone who loved her despite her cursed form? Then, before she could react, a blinding green light filled the temple and the voice of Wadjet herself shook the earth. You have passed the trials, child. Neferet's heart pounded. Was this redemption? But Wadjet's next words made her blood run cold. Now, you must choose. The temple trembled as the divine presence of Wadjet filled the air. The green flames of the goddess swirled around Neferet and Kamose, their heat pressing upon them like the weight of fate itself. You have walked the path of exile, Wadjet's voice echoed. You have endured trials of wisdom, sacrifice, and trust. And now, Neferet, you stand at the threshold of destiny. The massive serpent that was Neferet coiled tightly, her golden eyes fixed upon the radiant figure of the goddess. I have suffered, Neferet hissed, her voice twisting through the air like a whisper on the wind. I have lost everything. But Kamose, he still sees me, despite what I have become. Kamose stood firm, his gaze unwavering. I have waited for you, he said softly. I will wait 100 lifetimes more. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Then, Wadjet's emerald eyes burned brighter. Then choose, child, she commanded. Remain as you are, a guardian of the old ways, a serpent of the sands, untouched by time, or reclaim your human form, but at a cost. The temple walls shuddered, sand drifting from the cracks as divine power crackled in the air. If you become mortal once more, Wadjet warned, your years will be counted. The gift of immortality will be lost to you. You will know age, sickness, and death. A terrible silence fell between them. Neferet felt her harder human heart, buried deep beneath scales and instinctash with indecision. She could stay as she was, untouched by time, a legend of the sands, feared but never forgotten. Or she could return, live and love, but one day, die. Her golden eyes flickered to Kamose. He stood before her, not as a prince, not as a king, but as the boy who had once loved her, before fate tore them apart. What was eternity without love? Her choice was clear. I choose life. The moment the words left her, the flames of Wadjet exploded outward, engulfing the temple in a brilliant green blaze. A searing heat consumed Neferet's body, pain and transformation intertwining in a final test of endurance. Her bones shifted, her form unraveling and remaking itself. The agony was unlike anything she had ever known, worse than when she had first become a serpent, worse than exile, worse than loss. But through the fire, she held on to the love that had never abandoned her. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain vanished. She collapsed onto the temple floor, but this time, with hands, with arms, with legs. Her skin was warm, flesh, not scales. She gasped, her lungs drinking in the air as a woman once more. Kamose fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as they brushed against her cheek. Neferet. His voice cracked with emotion. Tears slid down her face as she looked at him, not as a beast, not as a monster, but as herself. She had returned. She was human again. But as Kamose pulled her into his arms, a sharp chill ran through Neferet's spine. Something was wrong. She turned to Wadjet, whose gaze remained unreadable, unwavering. A choice has its cost, the goddess said solemnly. And the price for breaking the will of the gods is high. Neferet's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Wadjet extended a hand, and suddenly, the air around them shifted. The flames of the temple dimmed, and a second figure appeared, Merit, Neferet's mother. But her face was lined with age, her hair streaked with silver. Neferet staggered back. How long have I been gone? Her mother's lips quivered, tears filling her eyes. Neferet, it has been nearly 20 years. A great weight crushed Neferet's chest. The years she had spent in exile, the moments she had clung to, as if frozen in time, they had not been frozen for the rest of the world. Her village, her people, had moved on. And worse still, she turned to Kamose, and for the first time, she noticed the strands of gray in his dark hair. The years had not been kind to him either. The boy she had loved was now a man nearing the end of his reign. A life she had dreamed of sharing with him had already passed without her. Her hands shook as she grasped his. I was too late. Kamose shook his head, pulling her close. That is all that matters. But deep in her heart, Neferet knew fate had still taken something from her. And she would never get it back. The sands of Kemet carried many story-estals of kings and warriors, gods and curses. But the tale of Neferet, the Serpent Maiden, would live on forever. Some say she returned to her village and lived out the rest of her days as the wife of a great king, a woman who had once defied the gods and lived to tell the tale. Others whisper that she still roams the deserts, half woman, half serpent, watching over the temples of old, a guardian of lost knowledge. And some say that on quiet nights, when the wind howls through the dunes, one can still hear the faintest whisper of a serpent's hiss, not in fear, but in longing. A reminder that some curses never truly fade. They only change,